She gave my award to another man. She thought I was hurt, but I was done. The grease had been in Cal Rennick's knuckles for so long he stopped noticing it. It lived in the creases of his palms the way old scars do, not painful, just permanent. He'd scrub before a shift and they'd still be there, dark half-moons under each nail, proof of where he'd been and what he'd given up to get here. Here was Star Station Vyark, a rusted iron halo hanging 40 million kilometers above nothing, home to 6,000 sentient species and one very tired human being. The station's central ring housed the arena. Everything else existed to orbit it. The transport lanes, the commercial decks, the food markets, the medical bays, the entertainment quarters, the underground economy on level 7. All of it arranged in rough concentric purpose around that central fact. The arena existed, the arena drew traffic, and everything on the station lived off what the traffic left behind. Cal was a short-order cook in a place called the Flux, a diner wedged between a bioluminescent fungus market and a spinal adjustment parlor catering to creatures with 4 separate spines. The Flux smelled like burnt protein fat, and something the Scifi who owned the place burned in a corner dish for luck, a smell that might have been incense or might have been laundry. Cal had stopped distinguishing. He worked the flat top, fired orders, didn't talk much. And every night after his shift, he walked 3 levels down to a gym that didn't have a name, just a sign that said WEIGHTS in standard galactic and in smaller letters below, no credit. He trained alone. He'd been doing it for 2 years, 6 days a week, 2 hours minimum, often 4. He ran the station's outer maintenance corridors at 400 because the only real track was arena property, and they'd stopped allowing humans to use it 18 months ago after the last human contender forfeited a preliminary match. He hit a heavy bag he'd modified himself, packed with extra density because standard bags didn't give his hands the resistance they needed. He lifted. He grappled with a training drone he'd reprogrammed for higher variability settings, an illegal modification he'd figured out by reading the maintenance manual 3 times, and then doing the opposite of what it warned against. He trained for something he hadn't yet defined precisely. Not the arena, he told himself. It wasn't the arena. He told himself he was just keeping his body ready. For what, he couldn't say if you asked him directly. He'd change the subject. He'd go back to the flat top. "You're slow today," said Nix, from behind the counter. Nix was his coworker, technically his supervisor, since the Flux's AI management system had promoted her after she was the only employee who hadn't been cited for a violations incident. Nix was from a species called the Vellani. She had 4 arms, a face like a clenched fist, and more warmth in her than anyone Cal had met on the station. She stood 70 centimeters tall and had once lifted the entire flat-top griddle off its mooring to clean underneath it, one-handed, while holding a conversation about the station's atmospheric recycling contracts with the other 3. "I'm always slow," Cal said, without turning from the viewport. Outside, a group of dock workers filed past. One of them wore a t-shirt that said Horn Stays Champion and had a holographic image of a massive cyborg alien printed on the chest, its armored fists raised, its face, what passed for a face, twisted into something that could only be called aggression in any species' emotional vocabulary. "Horn's fight is tomorrow," Nick said. "I know. But you could go watch." "I don't go to the arena." Nix made a sound that might have been laughter or might have been the Vellani equivalent of rolling her eyes. "You train every night and you don't go to the arena. Cal, what exactly do you think you're training for?" He didn't answer, because the door opened and an alien the size of a ground vehicle walked in. It was a Gorathi, one of the arena's mid-tier fighters, recognizable by the ridged cranial structure, and the way its secondary arms crossed over its chest in a posture that communicated, in most galactic body language, "Get out of my way." This one had the look of an arena professional, deliberate mass, scarred over old injuries, eyes that found the room before the body had finished entering it. It moved to a stool with the unconscious confidence of something that had never had to negotiate space with anything smaller than itself. Cal turned back to the flat top. The Gorathi sat, ordered something complex in a dialect Cal didn't speak. Nix translated. Cal cooked. For 5 minutes it was just the sound of the griddle and the distant bass thrum of the station's atmospheric processors. Then the Gorathi said something to Nix that made her go still, a particular stillness, the kind that in any species means someone has said something that requires a decision about how to respond. "It says," Nix said carefully, "that your food smells like what humans feed their children. It says this is appropriate, because only children would eat food prepared by hands that have never fought for anything." Cal set down his spatula. He looked at the flat top for a moment. He thought about the 2 years. He thought about the 400 runs and the nameless gym and the modified training drone and the fracture scar on his right hand's third knuckle that had never quite healed right. He thought about what it meant to do something in private that no one acknowledged and no one saw and that existed entirely for its own reasons. "Tell it," Cal said, "that I appreciate the feedback." He went back to cooking. The Gorathi reached across the counter and knocked the plate out of his hands. What happened next was not planned. It was not performed. It was not the thing Cal had been training toward for 2 years in a nameless gym. It was simply the result of having a body that had been prepared for violence being placed in close proximity to violence, and responding the way a bowstring responds when you pull it and release, without deliberation, without theater. The Gorathi was large. It had 2 primary arms and 2 secondary arms, and when it stood up it blocked the light from the overhead panels. It reached for Cal with the confidence of something that had never been seriously challenged, which is always the most dangerous kind of reach. The reach that doesn't expect resistance, that has never had to. Cal gave it resistance. He broke the reach at the wrist, rotated under the secondary arms, put his shoulder into the Gorathi's lower center of mass, and drove it backward through a display case of synthetic protein supplements. The display case didn't survive. The Gorathi didn't get up for several seconds. When it did get up, it looked at Cal with an expression that was, in any species' body language, surprise. Pure and uncomplicated surprise. "You should go," Cal told it. It went. Nick stood in the ruins of the display case. She looked at Cal. She looked at the door. She looked at Cal again, and this time her expression was something he hadn't seen from her before, something like recognition. "The management AI is going to fire us both," she said. "Probably. Worth it, though." "Yeah," Cal said. He picked up his spatula from where it had landed. Worth it. The woman who arrived 2 hours later was not what Cal expected, though he wasn't sure what he'd expected. She was human, or appeared to be, which on Vyark was a distinction worth making, and she moved through the Flux's wreckage with the brisk efficiency of someone who evaluated damaged things for a living, and had long since stopped being surprised by the form damage took. Her name was Maurice Quinn. She managed arena fighters. Her father had done the same job before her, and his father before him, and somewhere in that lineage, the capacity for sentiment had been diluted down to something close to undetectable, or had been very carefully maintained beneath the operational surface. She had the footage on a data chip. She'd been watching it when the reports came in, because she'd been watching Cal for 2 months, watching him run the maintenance corridors, watching him work the bag in the nameless gym, watching the footage of his amateur fights from the year before he arrived on Vyark. She had done this the way she did everything, methodically, without announcing it, and with the understanding that information gathered privately was worth more than information gathered publicly. "You put a Gorathi through a display case," she said. "It started it." "I know, I have the footage." She set the data chip on the counter between them. "I've been looking for someone to fill a contract slot. I had a Denthian lined up, but he pulled a posterior tendon last week, and now I'm short a fighter for the preliminary bracket. I don't fight. You just fought. That was a reflex. The best fights always are. Quinn sat down on a stool that had survived the altercation and folded her hands on the counter with the stillness of someone completely comfortable with silence. She had the eyes of someone who had watched too many people underperform and had developed a very fine calibration for the difference between underperformance and absence of ceiling. You know what you are. You're the third human I've approached this season. The other two asked about the signing bonus before I finished my second sentence. I don't care about the signing bonus. What do you care about? Cal thought about the question for longer than was comfortable. Outside, through the Flux's scratched viewport, the station's central ring glittered. The arena's announcement lighting was cycling through colors, tomorrow's fight, Horn versus some mid-tier challenger who was going to get dismantled, and the galaxy was watching it the way it always watched, with the settled certainty of an outcome that had been predetermined since the moment the bracket was seeded. I want a fight that means something, Cal said, not a preliminary bracket. Quinn studied him. You're going to need to win a few preliminary brackets first. Then let's talk. Nix found him that evening in the gym without a name. She sat on a bench and watched him work the heavy bag, the modified bag, packed dense, the one that gave his hands what the standard ones couldn't. She had brought food from the Flux's backup kitchen and set it beside her on the bench, and she watched him work and said nothing for a long time, which was the Vellani way of saying something important without the noise of language getting in the way. You know who she is? Nix asked eventually. Quinn, arena manager. Her fighter list, you know her fighter list. I know she doesn't manage anyone currently in the top 10. I know she's independent, doesn't work under Roger's umbrella. I know she gets her fighters into the bracket, and then they hit a ceiling, and she loses the contract. She managed Marcus Diablo, Nix said, 30 years ago before you were born. He was the last human to make the championship bracket. He lost in the semi-final. He didn't fight again. You know where he is now? No. Level 7, the Underring. He collects redemption tokens from the arena's commemorative dispensers and trades them for food credits. There's a plaque of him in the arena lobby. Bronze. Humans walk past it every day on the way to the viewing galleries. Most of them don't look at it. Nix paused, turning a piece of food between two of her fingers. I just want to make sure you know the shape of this thing you're walking into. Cal unwrapped his hands. He'd split the tape over the third knuckle of his right hand again. It always went there, the fracture scar from a training accident 2 years ago that had never quite healed right, the one the station clinic had advised him to rest, and that he had not rested. I know the shape of it, he said. Then why? He thought about it. He thought about his grandfather on Earth, about what the man had told him the last time they'd spoken before Cal left, about purpose and the body and the specific texture of doing hard things in a form that could be damaged. Because if I go home now, nothing I did here means anything. And because, he stopped, looked at the bag, started again. Because my grandfather worked in a mine on Earth. Physical labor, the kind nobody does anymore because machines do it better and cheaper. But he did it because it was the one thing he could do that no machine could do the same way he did it, with his specific hands, his specific history. He said there was something human about doing hard things in a body that could be hurt by them. He looked at his split knuckle. The blood was already drying to a rust color. I think he was right, Cal said. I think that's the whole thing, that's all of it. Nix was quiet for a moment. The gym hummed around them, the air processors, the distant bass note of the station's rotation, the sound of a place that had no name because no one important enough to name it had ever paid attention to it. You're going to need a second in your corner, she said. I don't. I'm not asking. She folded 2 of her 4 arms across her chest in the posture that, in Vellani body language, was not exactly a statement but was also not available for negotiation. I have a Vellani fight training certification. Did I mention that? You didn't. My people invented the concept of the corner second actually, 12,000 years ago, before humans had gotten around to standing upright structurally speaking. She tilted her head. So, are we doing this? Cal almost smiled, almost. Yeah, we're doing this. He won his first 3 fights without losing a round, and the surprise that generated was instructive. Not because the wins were improbable technically. The handicap system equalized physiology across species, and Cal's technique was sound, the product of 2 years of isolated and unglamorous work. But because the assumption on Vyark, settled over 50 years of human fighters losing early and often, was that the equalization field was the ceiling for what a human could accomplish. Strip away the alien biological advantages, put everyone on equal footing, and in theory a human could compete. In practice, something still went wrong. Something about the human presence in the arena that the field couldn't quantify and couldn't fix. What Cal had was a theory about that something. He thought the issue wasn't technical. He thought it was psychological. Not in a weak sense, not some vague inadequacy of spirit. In a specific, trainable sense. The capacity to absorb damage and continue working. Pain tolerance as a genuine strategic asset. The willingness to take the combination instead of running from it, because running only delays the hit and costs you position. His second opponent was a Scifi with 6 functional striking limbs, who had never in its career faced anything that stayed standing after the first full combination. Cal stayed standing. He took the combination, and he moved inside it, and he found the angle on the back foot that Marcus Diablo had used 30 years ago in footage that nobody watched anymore. The fight ended in the 3rd round with Cal still on his feet, and the Scifi's training team throwing something that functioned as a towel. After his 3rd fight, the arena's booking screen started carrying his name with a specificity they hadn't used before. Not just his name, a note that said human, the way early records of unusual geological formations say things like unexpected depth. The human crowd on Vyark began filtering into the preliminary bracket galleries, cautiously, the way people return to something that has hurt them before and might hurt them again. Between his 4th and 5th fights, he met Marcus Diablo. He found him on level 7, in a section of the underring that smelled like recycled water and old circuit insulation. The man was sitting on a folded transit blanket outside a storage bay he'd been using as a room. He was old in the way that people are old when they've been used hard, the kind that looks less like age and more like what remains after something valuable has been burned through completely. He was watching a projection on a cracked datapad, arena footage, old matches, his own from 30 years ago. Cal sat down across from him on a crate. "You're Marcus Diablo." The man looked up. His eyes were still sharp, fighter's eyes, the kind that found the room before the rest of the face committed to an expression. "And you're Rennick, saw your last fight on the public feed." He looked back at the datapad. "You moved inside on the Scifi." "Good thinking. It's what you taught. I didn't teach you anything. Your fights, I watched all of them I could find, every available record. You used to do that, take the combination and move inside, find the angle on the back foot. It's in your 3rd match against the Denthian in the 0-7 bracket, the one most people say you were lucky to survive." Marcus was quiet for a moment, looking at the footage. "I wasn't lucky," he said. "I was ready. The announcer called it luck because he didn't know what to call a human who was still standing." "I know. That was 30 years ago. The technique doesn't expire." "No," he set the datapad down. The footage kept playing without sound, his younger self moving in an old-style arena, smaller than the current one, the crowd less dense but somehow more present. It was a different sport then, dirtier but honest. Roger wasn't in charge. The handicap system worked the way it was supposed to. A human could fight and have it mean something. He rubbed one of his hands against his knee. The hand had the same quality as Cal's, permanent staining, old knuckle damage. The the specific texture of years that had been used all the way down to the grain. Now it's a show. You know that. I know what people say. What people say is true. Roger doesn't let anyone win who he doesn't want to win. The handicap system's been adjusted. Not obviously, nothing that would show up in a standard audit. But incrementally, small calibrations. Over 6 years, Horn has carried a .2 advantage in the final round of every title defense. .2 in the handicap index is enormous. The difference between a fight that's possible and a fight that's already decided before the gate opens. Cal sat with that for a long moment. The underring hummed around them, the station's bones, the infrastructure that everything above it rested on. "You're sure?" Cal asked. "I spent a year trying to prove it and couldn't. Roger is very good at making sure nothing is provable, but I'm sure." Marcus looked at him steadily, the way he'd looked at opponents in his fighting years, not aggressive, just completely present. "I'm not saying this to warn you off. I'm saying it so you know what you're actually fighting. It's not just Horn. Horn is the easy part. Honestly, he's an extraordinary fighter, but he's a fighter. The machine around him is what beats you. Unless someone takes the machine apart." Marcus looked at him for a long time. Something moved in the old eyes, something that had been waiting. "You have a second." "Nick's my corner." "Good one." 4 arms, Villani Fight Training Certification. Marcus almost smiled. 4 arms in your corner. He picked up the datapad again, holding it in the damaged hand, in the hand that had moved inside combinations for 30 years. "You know what I'd do different if I was doing it again?" "What?" "I'd stop training for the fight and start training for the moment before the fight. The moment when they've already decided it's over. That's when humans win, not when we're expected to, but when we've already been written off and there's nothing left to lose and nothing left to perform." He tapped the screen. "Watch the 3rd round of my semi-final. Watch my hands at the start of the 3rd, when the crowd had already gone quiet because everyone knew I was finished. I did the best work of my career in that round. Nobody saw it because they'd stopped looking, but I know it was there." They were at 8 wins when Jade found him. He was eating alone in the Flux, under new management following the Gorathi incident, but which had rehired both Cal and Nix, because the new manager had reviewed the security footage and decided that 2 employees who'd handled a Gorathi confrontation without requiring emergency services represented an acceptable operational risk. She sat across from him without asking. She was dressed differently than he'd expected, less the careful construction of someone in Roger's orbit, more something that felt like the absence of a performance she'd put down for the evening. "You've been avoiding me," she said. "I've been training." People who avoid people say that. She stole a piece of his synthetic protein without ceremony, a move that said something about comfort and disregard simultaneously, and ate it while looking at him. "I'm not who you think I am. I don't think anything about you." "Liar." She leaned her elbows on the table. Up close, her face was more complicated than it appeared from a distance. There were lines in it that performance didn't put there, that came from a different kind of work. "I know what Roger uses me for. I know what the job is. I'm not asking you to feel sorry for me. I come from a system where Roger owns the shipping contracts, and if you want your family to eat, you make certain accommodations." She said it the way people say things they've had to practice saying without flinching, without apology, as a statement of conditions rather than identity. "But I'm telling you now, before things go further, he's going to come after you, not through the bracket, through the handicap system, and he's going to try to use me to get to you first." Cal set his fork down. He looked at her carefully, not with suspicion, with attention, the kind of attention he used in the arena to read what was happening underneath what appeared to be happening. "Why are you telling me this?" She was quiet for a moment. A long moment, the kind that earns itself. That means the answer is something actually considered rather than something prepared. "Because I've watched him do it to 10 fighters in 6 years. 8 of them never fought again. 2 of them are on level 7, and one of them is Marcus Diablo, who I used to watch fight on public broadcasts when I was a child, and who was the most remarkable thing I'd ever seen a person do with a body and a will. She looked at her hands. And because you're the first person in 2 years who looked me in the eyes when we met and didn't immediately assume what I was. I didn't know what you were. No, you didn't, she looked up. That's the whole thing, that's all of it. He recognized the phrasing. The echo of his own reasoning arriving from somewhere. He hadn't expected it. They sat there for a while in the flux, while the station cycled around them and the arena's lights pulsed slow through the viewport. He was at 10 wins and ranked 3rd overall when Roger made his move. He'd been watching the bracket, watching the seeding, watching for the small handicap index manipulations Marcus had described. He'd had Nick's run comparative analysis twice. Everything looked clean. He'd been watching the front of the thing, and Roger's approach came from a direction that wasn't the front. 3 days before his scheduled semifinal, the fatigue hit him and he thought it was overtraining, the accumulated weight of 10 fights, and the months of preparation behind them, the body finally presenting its bill. He sat down in the nameless gym and didn't get up for 2 hours. When Nix found him, he was sweating in a way that had nothing to do with exertion, and she called the independent clinic on level 4 without asking him whether that was what he wanted. Slow toxin, the doctor said. Organophosphate base, modified for human biochemistry. Not lethal, designed to induce acute neuromotor impairment lasting 48 to 72 hours. Whoever formulated this knew the specific physiology they were targeting. It doesn't trigger standard pre-fight screening markers, because it operates below the threshold those markers scan for. Cal lay on the examination bed looking at the ceiling. His hands felt like they'd been packed in sand from the inside. Nick stood beside the bed with all 4 arms crossed, the posture that in Villani meant something between absolute stillness and the state just before action. Can you counteract it? Already started. Enzyme protocol for this compound class. 4 hours for the acute phase to begin clearing. Full motor function returns in 12 to 14 hours. Nix looked at Cal. 12 hours, your fight is in 63. I know. You knew this was coming. I knew something was coming. Not this specific approach. He closed his eyes against the ceiling lights. Jade warned me he'd try to use her to get close enough. She did her part. She got close enough to lower my guard about other vectors. I wasn't watching what I ate. She betrayed you. Cal thought about the table in the flux. The careful way she'd said that's the whole thing, that's all of it. The absence of performance in it. The lines in her face that were the wrong kind for someone running a con. I don't think so, he said. I think someone else handled the food at some point. I think she didn't know. Nix looked at him with the expression she wore when she was computing something she found statistically improbable. You are either very perceptive or very foolish. Probably both, Cal said. Usually both. He made it to the arena in 58 hours. Not 63, 58. Because the enzyme protocol worked faster than projected. And because Cal had trained his body for 2 years specifically to do unreasonable things under conditions that were not reasonable. And because the nameless gym and the 400 runs and the modified heavy bag had produced in him a certain fundamental stubbornness about what his body was allowed to refuse to do. He stood in the fighter's corridor below the arena floor and listened to the crowd above him. The sound was different from this side, lower, more physical, something you felt through the floor and the walls and the soles of your feet more than heard with your ears. Nix was behind him, 2 of her hands on his shoulders working through the warm-up routine, the other 2 folded at her sides in the formal Vellani posture for something between determination and grief. Roger's in the box, she said. I know. He thinks you're still in the medical clinic. His people confirmed you were admitted. I know. When you walk out, he's going to see you and he's going to make the move he has left. The handicap system. I know. She pressed harder with the hands on his shoulders. Not adjustment, contact. The kind of contact that communicates something that doesn't have a word in standard galactic or any other language the station spoke. Cal. Yeah. In my culture, she said, when someone goes to do something that might get them killed, we don't say good luck. We say, may you do the truest thing you know how to do. He turned and looked at her. She had the face of someone who had been told not to expect much from a situation and had quietly refused to accept the instruction for so long that the refusal had become structural. May you do the truest thing you know how to do, he said back. She nodded. She released his shoulders. She went to the corner with the crisp efficiency of someone who had been ready for this moment for a very long time. He walked out. The crowd reacted to his entrance. The way crowds react when something they've decided is resolved turns out not to be. There was a beat of silence, the specific silence of recalibration, of a room adjusting its understanding of what it had expected versus what it was seeing, and then a noise that was less applause and more the collective physical expression of 6,000 beings processing unexpected information at the same moment. Cal didn't look at Roger's box. He felt it, the disruption in the air, the way attention has weight when it's concentrated and shaken. He looked at Horn. Horn was already in the arena. He had the bearing of the reigning champion, which is a particular thing, not arrogance exactly, but something settled and certain, the posture of something that has never been seriously threatened at the thing it's built to do. He was extraordinary. Whatever else was true about Roger's operation, Horn was genuinely the best fighter in that arena, and Cal knew it without resentment, the way you know a mountain is tall. The handicap system activated. Its bass-frequency pulse moved through Cal like a second heartbeat. The equalization field settled over him, that familiar sensation of wearing someone else's borrowed coat, the field that stripped biological advantage and forced every species into the same fundamental physical conversation. The first round went to Horn. Not cleanly, Cal made Horn work for every exchange, used the angles, used the inside position when he could find it. But Horn's technique was legitimate, and Cal's right hand still carried the residue of the toxin. A half-beat lag between intention and execution that Horn found and exploited by the end of the round. Between rounds, Nix worked his corner with all four hands simultaneously. One with the recovery compound, one with the towel, one applying pressure to a cut above his eyebrow, one holding his chin up to keep his attention on her face and not on the crowd or the box or any of the other things that could pull him somewhere he didn't need to be. He's leaving his left side open in the clinch, she said. Every time, he thinks you're not quick enough to use it. You're close enough even with the right hand. Use the left. You've trained this. My right hand. Use the left, 2 years, Cal. You've been building this. The body knows what to do. That's what the 2 years are for, so that when everything else goes wrong, the body still knows what to do. She pressed her palm flat against his chest for a moment. A Vellani gesture. May you do the truest thing. Yeah. He went back out. The second round was different. Somewhere in the arena's technical infrastructure, high above the combat floor on a catwalk that maintenance crews used twice a month and arena management used not at all, something was happening. Cal wouldn't know the details until later. What he knew in the moment was that halfway through the second round, the equalization field shifted, a pressure he'd been compensating for since the opening bell changed character. His reaction timing compressed. His right hand, which had been fighting back toward function, retreated again. He took a shot from Horn that he should have slipped, then another. The crowd's sound changed pitch, not louder, lower, the specific frequency of a room that has made up its mind about how this ends. But in the covering, in the space between getting hit and deciding what to do about it, he found the thing Marcus Diablo had pointed him toward. The moment before the moment. The moment when it's already decided and the crowd has stopped watching, and there's no longer anything to perform for. He stopped defending. He moved inside. He gave Horn his right side, presented it deliberately, because Horn's pattern was to hammer the offered opening and follow immediately with the left hook that was his signature close. Cal had studied the footage. He knew that pattern the way he knew his own breathing, the way you know the particular creak of a specific stair in a house you grew up in. Horn took the invitation. The left hook started its arc, and Cal slipped inside it by 8 centimeters. Exactly 8, the margin he'd measured, the margin that existed because the pattern never varied, because Horn had been fighting in a rigged system for 6 years, and rigged systems teach you not to adapt because you don't have to, and drove his left elbow into Horn's center mass. It was not a dramatic strike. It would not make the highlight compilation. It was the kind of strike that works only because it finds the one place a body is completely unguarded, because the body's owner has already won this fight in his mind. Horn folded. He didn't go down. He was a champion and he had the physics champions have. But he folded in the way that means something fundamental has broken in the architecture of the exchange, that the certainty has been interrupted. He covered. He backed up. And for the first time in 6 years, for the first time on film, in any record, in any account that anyone who watched the arena closely would later be able to find, the reigning champion of the Viewership arena looked at what was in front of him and calculated whether he could continue. He continued. But the calculation had happened, visible to anyone who was watching for it, and Cal had been watching for exactly it. 3 minutes later, with the crowd making a sound Cal had never heard from any crowd, it was over. He stood in the center of the arena floor and did not raise his hands, did not perform. He stood there breathing, feeling the equalization field deactivate as the match ended, feeling his right hand come back, the toxin's last residue, the field's interference, all of it lifting simultaneously, and the hand was his again, fully his, all the way down to the fracture scar. Nyx was over the barrier in seconds, all 4 hands working. She didn't say anything for a moment. She just worked, the corner second doing what corner seconds do in the aftermath of what they've witnessed, which is care for the body that did the thing so the mind has time to follow. "You did it," she said finally. "We did it. Don't be sentimental. You literally said, may you do the truest." That was tactical. That's different. But her face was doing the thing the Vellani face does when it is trying very hard not to do the thing it's doing, and 2 of her 4 arms were gripping 2 of his in the Vellani embrace that has no standard galactic word, because the Vellani find it embarrassing to admit that the gesture exists. From Roger's box there was silence. The story of what had happened in the technical infrastructure came out over the days that followed. Nyx had suspected the handicap manipulation the moment Cal reported the field change mid-fight. She had called Marcus Diablo 2 nights before the bout, a conversation Cal hadn't known about, and the old man had listened for 40 minutes and then said yes and then gone, alone, to find the system node. He'd known where it was from 30 years of trying to find it. He was an old man who lived in the underring and collected commemorative tokens. No one was watching for him. He'd found 2 of Roger's people in the server room, and he'd handled them with the only thing left in his inventory after 3 decades. Himself, his body, the specific human capacity to keep working in conditions that argued persuasively for stopping. When the node came back online and the interference cleared, the fight was still happening. Cal was still in it. Marcus had walked into the medical wing afterward with a broken wrist and 2 cracked ribs, and had sat in a waiting room chair with the stillness of someone who had needed, for a very long time, to do something that would matter and had found it. A nurse asked his name for intake. "Marcus Diablo," he'd said, "former arena fighter." The nurse typed it. She didn't look up. It was a name on a form. It was also the name on the bronze plaque in the lobby. He didn't mention that. He looked at his broken wrist, and then at the ceiling, and then at nothing in particular. And something in his face had traveled to a place that didn't have coordinates. The formal recognition ceremony happened in the arena lobby, under the plaque. It was elaborate in the way that things are elaborate when an institution needs to demonstrate that it had always expected this outcome. There were cameras from 6 networks. There was a sound system playing something triumphant in 4 simultaneous cultural idioms that didn't quite resolve into harmony. There was a crowd of approximately 700 people, most of them human, standing in the lobby of an arena that had not cared about humans for 50 years. Cal stood in front of the championship presenter, a species with ceremonial plumage that took 17 minutes to fully extend, during which the lobby was very still and very quiet, and received the medallion and the contract and the rank. Nick stood behind him to his left in the formal Vellani posture of witnessed achievement, 4 arms arranged precisely, trying very hard not to look like someone who found the plumage excessive, which was difficult because it was excessive. Marcus Diablo stood to Cal's right, cast on the wrist, tape on the ribs, clothes that Quinn had sourced for him from a station retail account, quietly, without announcing it. He was looking at the plaque, his own younger face in bronze relief, looking out at the lobby with the frozen expression of a man who had believed the fight was still winnable. Cal leaned toward him. "How's the wrist?" "Terrible," Marcus said. "Doctor says 6 weeks. You want a room while it heals. I have a housing credit now." Marcus looked at him. "Station policy," Cal said. "Champion gets a residential allotment on level 3, more space than one person needs." The old man looked back at the plaque. He was quiet for a long moment, looking at his own younger face, and then he looked away, and what was in his expression when he turned from the bronze was not nostalgia and not grief, and was perhaps closest to completion. The feeling of something that had been unfinished for a long time finally being handed its ending. "Quinn told me," Marcus said quietly, "that she was going to forfeit your match if the handicap manipulation held, pull you out, protect you." Cal processed this. "She didn't tell me that." "No, she didn't. She made that decision privately and set it aside and let you go out there without it." Marcus paused. "And then she arranged this entire ceremony, invited every network, set everything up perfectly. And when the championship board asked who should receive the secondary honor, the corner recognition, she submitted Nix's name." Cal looked at Quinn. Quinn was on the far side of the lobby, speaking with a championship board member with the brisk efficiency that was her natural mode, her hands folded, her eyes doing the thing they did, evaluating, calibrating, giving nothing away. "She gave her credit away," Cal said. "She does that. It's a habit she has had her whole life." Marcus touched the cast on his wrist absently. "When I lost my semi-final 30 years ago, she was 18, came with her father. Afterward, when it was clear I was done, she came to find me. Said, 'You did the truest thing you knew how to do.' I didn't know what she meant. I was too far inside the loss to hear it." He paused. "I heard it tonight. On the catwalk when I was deciding whether I could get up. I heard it then." Cal looked at Quinn across the lobby. He thought about Nix's 4 hands in his corner. He thought about Marcus on a catwalk, alone in the dark above the arena, with everything he had left. He thought about Jade's voice across the table in the flux. That's the whole thing, that's all of it, and what it had cost her to say it. He walked over to Quinn. She stopped mid-sentence and looked at him. "You were going to forfeit my fight," he said. "Yes. To protect me." "It was a miscalculation. You didn't need protection. You gave Nix the corner recognition. She was in your corner. It's the appropriate." "Quinn." She stopped. "You should have had someone in yours for 30 years, all those fighters, all that work." He held the medallion in his 2 hands, the right one with its fracture scar, the left one that had done what it was built for. "Come have dinner at the Flux, all of you. Nix Marcus, you me, Jade if she'll come. He looked around the lobby at the plaque and the cameras and the networks and the 700 people standing in a space that had decided they didn't matter. I'll cook. Quinn blinked. It was the most unguarded thing he'd ever seen her do. A fraction of a second in which the evaluation and the efficiency and the 30 years of maintained surface fell away, and there was just a person looking at him. You'll cook, she said. It's what I know how to do, among other things. She looked at the medallion, at his right hand with its scar, at his face, and he let her look because she'd spent 30 years managing fighters and she deserved to see one clearly for once. All right, she said, all right. That night in the Flux, Cal made food for 4 people on the flat top that had survived everything the past 2 years had thrown at it. He cooked the way his grandfather had worked the mine, with his specific hands, in his specific body, making something that no system could replicate the same way, because no system had the same history in its hands. Nix sat on the counter with 2 of her arms helping, and 2 crossed in her habitual posture of mild exasperation at everything, which was also, Cal had come to understand, her posture of profound contentment. Marcus ate slowly, paying attention to the experience in a way he'd gotten out of the habit of over 30 years of having nothing much to pay attention to. Quinn sat at the counter and didn't offer to manage anything and didn't evaluate the operation and didn't look anywhere except at the plate in front of her, and then at the people around her, as if she was recalibrating what around her meant. Jade came after midnight. She sat at the far end of the counter and didn't say much, but she ate, and she looked around at the people in the Flux, this specific collection of damaged and stubborn people who had found each other in the orbit of something worth finding, and something in her face that had been closed for a long time opened incrementally, the way a room opens when someone finally clears the window. Cal set a plate in front of her. What is this? She asked. Real food, Earth import. Quinn worked the supply chain. Jade looked at Quinn. Quinn did not look up from her own plate. She didn't tell you she did that, Jade said. No. She does that. I'm starting to understand. Jade looked at the plate. She picked up the fork. She ate 1 bite and then another, and it was the silence after the second one, the complete and uncalculated silence of someone tasting something that reaches somewhere they hadn't expected, that said more than anything else in the room. Cal stood behind the flat top and looked at the 4 of them. The old man with the broken wrist sitting straighter than he had in years. The 4-armed second who had never once treated this like anything other than what it was. The manager who gave away her credit as a matter of habit. The woman with a family she'd been fighting to protect and would keep fighting for. He thought about 2 years in a nameless gym. He thought about the 400 runs through maintenance corridors. He thought about the modified heavy bag and the modified training drone and the fracture scar on his knuckle that had never quite healed. He thought about what it meant to do the truest thing you know how to do when no one is watching and no one has decided it matters yet. The station turned in the dark. The arena's lights pulsed slow and patient through the viewport, cycling through colors that advertised the next event, the next fight, the next occasion for the galaxy to watch and place its bets. The championship medallion sat on the counter between the salt and the condiments, its surface catching the light from the flat top and returning it in pieces, and nobody looked at it. They didn't need to. It was there. It had been earned. It belonged to the specific hands that had earned it, and to the specific people who had made the earning possible, and to a nameless gym on a rusted halo 40 million kilometers above nothing, where a very tired human being had trained for 2 years for exactly this. Not the medallion. This, the table, the food, the people at it. That's the whole thing, that's all of it. The next morning, Roger was escorted from his offices on the arena's executive level by championship board commissioners and a pair of station security officers who moved with the unhurried confidence of people delivering a long-delayed outcome. Cal watched it from the lobby. Not by plan, he'd come to retrieve the medallion he'd left on the counter at the Flux the night before, which Quinn had collected and quietly deposited with the arena's official registry in the small hours of the morning, because someone had to, and she was the one who knew how. He'd come to get it back, and he'd found himself in the lobby at the moment the elevator doors opened, and Roger walked out between the commissioners with the rigid composure of a being that had decided, at some point it could not identify, to mistake control for permanence. Roger looked at Cal. He didn't stop walking. His expression didn't change, the mineral stillness held. The deep ocean eyes found him for a moment and held him and then released him. But something passed between them in that moment, not hostility, not the performance of victory and defeat, but something closer to acknowledgement. The oldest possible transaction between fighters. I see you and I saw what you did. Cal nodded. Roger's eyes moved forward. The elevator closed. Quinn appeared at Cal's shoulder. She had 2 cups of something that was almost coffee. One of the station's better approximations of it anyway, produced by a machine on level 2 that used actual Earth origin stock in the mornings before it ran out. She handed one to Cal without ceremony. They moved fast, Cal said. The championship board has been waiting for provable cause for 4 years. They had their forensic team in the handicap system node within 6 hours of the fight ending. She drank her approximation of coffee. It won't all stick. Roger has lawyers on 6 planets and enough legal insulation that some of this will take years to work through. But the arena license is suspended pending investigation. Horn's championship record is under review. She paused. His results stand, by the way. The board confirmed it. The handicap adjustment was real, but Horn's individual technique was legitimate. He was what he appeared to be. I know, Cal said. That's why it was a good fight. Quinn looked at him sideways. You respected him. I respected him. Doesn't mean I wasn't going to beat him. She almost smiled. Almost. The gesture happened somewhere near her eyes. They stood in the lobby for a moment, in front of the plaque. 30 years of Marcus Diablo's younger face looking out at a lobby that had stopped paying attention to it. The bronze had the slightly dulled quality of something that gets cleaned perfunctorily by maintenance crews who don't know what it represents. He's going to need a new plaque, Cal said. He told me he doesn't want one. I know, but he's going to get one anyway. Cal looked at the bronze face. He thought about the catwalk, the broken wrist, the choice that someone makes alone, in the dark, above a fight they have no stake in except the oldest possible stake, the one that says I was here once and what happened here mattered and I am not yet finished with mattering. You were 18 when he lost his semi-final. Yes. And you went to find him, afterward. Quinn was quiet for a moment. My father wanted to go straight to the transit dock. He thought it would be disrespectful to stay, that Marcus would want privacy. I thought the opposite. I thought the worst thing that could happen to someone after a loss like that was to be alone in a way that implied the loss was the final word. She drank her coffee. I was 18. I might have been wrong. You weren't wrong, Cal said. You don't know that. Marcus told me what you said to him. He heard it, Quinn. 30 years later, in a different fight, in a maintenance corridor above the arena floor, he heard it and it got him up. She looked at her hands wrapped around the cup. I managed 15 fighters, she said, over 30 years. 12 of them lost before the quarterfinals and moved on. 2 made the semifinals and lost and didn't fight again. And then there's you. She didn't look at him. I don't know what to do with you. You could stop managing me. I signed a 3-year contract. I mean stop managing the whole situation. Stop being 3 steps ahead of everything. Stop solving problems before anyone else has noticed them and never mentioning it. She looked at him. Just be here, he said. At the table, in the room, whatever this is that we're doing. He gestured vaguely toward the Flux, 2 corridors away, where the morning shift was starting and Nix was probably already behind the counter running the operation with 3 arms and a series of extremely concise instructions to the new kitchen staff. Whatever this is. Quinn was quiet for a long time. The lobby filled slowly around them, station workers starting their shifts, the ambient traffic of a morning on Vyark, the ordinary commerce of a place where 6,000 species had decided, collectively and for various reasons, to exist in close proximity. "I don't know how to do that," she said finally. "I know, neither do I." Cal finished the coffee. "But I've got a 3-year contract, so we have time to figure it out." He ran the maintenance corridors at 400 the next morning, and the morning after that. Not because he had a fight scheduled. Not because Nix told him to. Not because the championship required it, or Quinn's contract specified it, or anyone was watching and evaluating the discipline of the new human champion of the Vyark arena. Because it was 400, and the corridors were dark, and the maintenance drones moved past him like slow mechanical fish in a metal ocean, and there was something in the act of running in the dark through a station that 40 million kilometers above nothing that was, if he had to name it, the closest he knew how to get to the truest thing. He ran, his breath fogged in the recycled air, his right hand flexed and closed at his side, the fracture scar stretching and releasing, the old injury doing what old injuries do when you keep working them, not healing exactly, but becoming part of the machinery, part of what he was. Somewhere above him, the arena's lights were dark. The championship bracket was suspended pending review. The galaxy was recalibrating. Somewhere on level 3, in a residential unit that had come with a championship allotment and that now had 2 separate occupants, Marcus Diablo was probably awake. He'd told Cal he hadn't slept past 300 in years. Too much quiet on level 7. The quiet of level 3 was different, he'd said, fuller somehow, the quiet of a place that expected tomorrow rather than merely endured it. Somewhere in the flux, Nix was probably already there. She was always already there. Somewhere in the city of the station, Jade was working out what the next accommodation looked like, and what she was willing to let it cost her, and who she was when the cost became negotiable, and when it stopped being. Cal ran. His feet on the maintenance floor made a sound that no one else heard, a rhythm that existed entirely for itself, like training in a nameless gym, like work done in private that accumulates towards something that can't be predicted but can be trusted. The way his grandfather had gone down into the mine every morning knowing what he was going to do, and knowing that the doing of it was the point, not the coal, not the record of the coal, but the act of descent and return. He ran until the 400 shift change drones emerged from their bays and moved past him in both directions, their sensors registering him as an obstacle and recalibrating, and he thought, this is what it is, not the championship, not the bracket, not the galaxy's recalibration of what a human body is capable of when you give it 2 years in a nameless gym, and a reason to keep coming back. This, the run, the dark, the specific weight of the thing in his chest that had been there for 2 years, and that he now recognized not as ambition, but as the answer to a question he'd never quite found language for. What is a human in a galaxy that's decided you're finished? A human is the thing that gets up at 400 and runs in the dark. A human is the thing that moves inside the combination. A human is the thing that keeps coming back. He ran until the corridor ended, and then he turned and ran back.